The entire office at Stone Gems burst into applause as the company's newest talent acquisition specialist, hired to lead its AI-driven recruiting initiative, walked through the conference room doors. Employees smiled, welcomed her, and congratulated the young woman who had just joined the company. Standing among the crowd, 50-year-old Eva took a slow breath. She already knew what that applause meant. Over the past year, artificial intelligence had transformed workplaces across America. Companies were restructuring their operations, replacing experienced employees with younger professionals who understood AI better, hoping to reduce costs while increasing efficiency. Stone Gems had chosen the same path. Eva was the last employee on the company's layoff list. She had known for weeks that sooner or later, her turn would come. There was nothing left to argue about. As the applause faded, Eva returned to her office and continued reviewing the final stack of interview files on her desk. After more than 25 years at Stone Gems, she simply wanted to finish her remaining days the same way she had spent every day before them, with care, professionalism, and respect for the work she had devoted half of her life to. She had no idea that just 1 year later, Stone Gems would reach out and ask her to come back. Every weekday for the past 25 years had started the same way for Eva. At exactly 5:30 every morning, her alarm went off before the first light reached the quiet neighborhood outside Minneapolis. She reached across the bed to silence it before it could wake Peter, slipped out from under the blanket, and headed downstairs while the rest of the house remained still. She had followed the same routine for so many years that she no longer needed to think about it. Her body simply knew what came next. The coffee maker was always the first thing she turned on. While it brewed, she prepared breakfast, packed a small lunch for herself, and checked that everything she needed for work was already inside her handbag. A few moments later, scratching came from the back door. Eva smiled before she even opened it. "Good morning, Milo!" The golden retriever bounded inside with the same excitement he showed every single day. Eva laughed, rubbed his head, filled his food bowl, then opened the back door again so he could spend a few minutes running around the yard before breakfast. By the time Milo came back inside, Peter had already walked into the kitchen carrying the morning newspaper. Retirement had changed his schedule completely. At 58, he no longer had to rush through breakfast before heading to another construction site. Instead, he enjoyed slow mornings with fresh coffee, the newspaper, and the quiet company of the woman he had spent more than 30 years loving. Eva placed a plate in front of him before pouring coffee into his favorite mug. Peter accepted it with a smile that had never really changed over the years. "You know," he said while unfolding the newspaper, "one of these mornings you're going to sit down and actually finish breakfast with me." Eva smiled without stopping what she was doing. "Maybe after I retire," Peter laughed. "That's exactly what you told me 5 years ago. Then I guess you'll have to keep waiting." They shared breakfast together every morning, but it never lasted very long. Peter had nowhere he needed to be. Eva always had somewhere she needed to go. Every few minutes, her eyes drifted toward the clock hanging above the kitchen doorway. At exactly 6:35, she stood up, carried her dishes to the sink, picked up her handbag, and slipped on her coat. Before leaving, she leaned over and kissed Peter on the forehead. "Have a good day." Peter reached for her hand before she turned toward the front door. "Don't work too late again," Eva smiled. "I'll try." They both knew she had given the same answer for years. Milo followed Eva to the front door as he always did, waiting for the goodbye he expected every weekday morning. Eva knelt beside him and scratched beneath his chin. "You take good care of Dad while I'm at work," Milo answered with a happy wag of his tail before settling beside Peter near the living room window. Peter watched from inside the house as Eva backed her car out of the driveway and disappeared at the end of the street. He did that every morning without thinking. It had quietly become part of his own routine. While retirement had finally slowed Peter's life down, Eva's life continued moving at exactly the same pace it had for the past 25 years. She wasn't counting the days until retirement. She still looked forward to going to work every single morning. Stone Gems Corporate Solutions occupied several floors of a modern office building in downtown Minneapolis. Thousands of employees had worked there over the years, but very few had spent their entire careers inside those walls. Eva was one of them. She joined Stone Gems at 25 as a recruiting specialist and never left. Through economic downturns, leadership changes, mergers, and rapid expansion, she remained because she believed recruitment was never just about filling vacancies. Every person she hired would eventually become someone's coworker, someone's manager, or someone's leader. That responsibility had always meant more to her than simply matching qualifications to a job description. Her office reflected that belief. Instead of displaying awards or certificates, the shelves behind her desk held handwritten thank you cards, retirement photos, holiday pictures, and small gifts from former employees. Some had been there for nearly 20 years. Others had arrived only recently. Most came from people who no longer worked at Stone Gems but still remembered the woman who had opened the first important door in their careers. During 25 years at the company, Eva had interviewed thousands of candidates and watched many of them grow into leaders she was proud of. She never thought about those achievements as numbers. Every resume on her desk represented a person hoping for an opportunity to build a better future. That morning, before she had even finished hanging up her coat, 3 interview folders were already waiting on her desk. Her calendar remained packed with interviews, meetings, and hiring decisions until late afternoon. For many recruiters, success meant filling a position as quickly as possible. Eva measured success differently. She believed the impact of one hiring decision could last for years, long after everyone had forgotten the interview itself. That quiet conviction was why department leaders across Stone Gems continued seeking her opinion before making their most important hiring decisions. It didn't take long before the first knock came at Eva's office door. Luke stepped inside, carrying 2 candidate folders, and closed the door behind him. Recruiting managers stopped by Eva's office almost every day, but Luke usually came only when a decision refused to feel simple. "Morning, Eva," he said, placing both folders on her desk. "I could use another opinion," Eva smiled. "What position?" "Regional Operations Supervisor," he pointed toward the folders. "One candidate looks perfect on paper. More experience, stronger credentials, excellent references. The other is Naya. She has potential, but her resume doesn't stand out nearly as much." Eva opened the first folder, scanned it quietly, then moved to the second. She spent less than a minute reading before closing both files. Luke watched her carefully. Even after working beside Eva for years, he was still amazed by how quickly she found what mattered. She slid Naya's folder to one side. "Schedule her this afternoon?" Luke wasn't surprised, but he still smiled. "I had a feeling you'd say that." Eva looked up. "Did you?" Luke nodded. "Something about her caught my attention, but I couldn't explain what it was." Eva rested one hand on the folder. "Then don't try to explain it yet." Luke frowned slightly. Eva smiled. "Bring her in. Let's see if your instincts were pointing in the right direction." Luke picked up the folder and stood. "You know," he said with a quiet laugh, "after all these years, I still don't understand how you do it." Eva smiled as she returned to the next file waiting on her desk. "Neither do I," Luke laughed and shook his head before walking toward the door. As he reached the hallway, he glanced back one last time. Whenever an important hiring decision left people uncertain, everyone eventually ended up in Eva's office. Not because she always had the answer, but because 25 years of experience had taught the company something difficult to measure. Some judgments couldn't be reduced to a checklist. They had to be earned, one conversation at a time. Naya arrived that afternoon 10 minutes early. She wore a simple navy blue suit, carried a leather folder under one arm, and greeted the receptionist with enough confidence to hide the nervousness she was trying not to show. Eva watched through the glass wall of her office for a few moments before walking out to greet her herself. "Naya?" "Yes, I'm Eva. Thank you for coming in." The interview began like hundreds of others Eva had conducted over the years. They talked briefly about Naya's previous position, the responsibilities she had handled, and why she wanted to join Stone Gems. After a few minutes, Eva closed the resume and placed it beside her notebook. Naya noticed the movement and paused for a second. Most interviewers spent the entire meeting asking about qualifications listed on the document in front of them. Eva had already pushed it aside. "Can I ask you something that isn't on your resume?" Naya smiled. "Of course." Eva folded her hands together. "Tell me about a mistake you made at work that still stays with you today." Naya didn't answer right away. She spent several seconds thinking before speaking. "A few years ago, one of my teammates made a mistake on a client project. I knew about it before anyone else did, but I stayed quiet because I didn't want to embarrass him in front of the team. We lost the client 2 weeks later. I wasn't the one who made the mistake, but I was responsible for not speaking up when I still had the chance." Eva didn't interrupt. She simply listened. Naya continued. I learned that protecting someone's feelings for a day can sometimes hurt everyone for much longer. If something affects the team, it deserves an honest conversation, even when it's uncomfortable. Eva wrote a few notes before asking another question. If you could go back, would you handle it differently? Yes, Naya answered without hesitation. I'd still respect my teammate, but I'd choose the team over avoiding an awkward conversation. The interview continued for another 20 minutes. When it ended, Eva walked Naya to the office door, thanked her for coming, then returned to her desk. She looked at the evaluation form for a moment before writing a single sentence across the bottom of the page. A resume tells me what you've done. A conversation tells me who you are. She closed the folder and placed it on the stack marked recommended for hire. Over the years, Eva became one of the few people every department trusted when an important position needed to be filled. Managers asked for her opinion before making hiring decisions. Executives often delayed final interviews until she could join the conversation. Whenever someone thanked her for helping build the company, Eva always gave the same answer. I didn't build Stone Gems. The people we hired did. Most assumed she was simply being modest. The numbers told a different story. During 25 years at Stone Gems, Eva recruited more than 3,200 employees. 68 eventually became directors. Another 225 moved into management roles across the company. Others left to launch successful startups, lead growing businesses, or build careers they had never imagined during their first interview. Eva rarely kept track of where people ended up. She only remembered the conversations that gave them their first opportunity. One afternoon, Josh, now one of Stone Gems' directors, stopped by her office after finishing a leadership meeting. He smiled as he placed a small thank you card on her desk. Do you remember interviewing me? Eva looked up with a smile. Of course, Josh laughed. I don't know how you do that. You must have interviewed thousands of people. Eva glanced at the card before looking back at him. I remember the people, not the paperwork, Josh smiled. 20 years ago, everyone else interviewed the resume. You interviewed me, he paused for a moment. I wouldn't be sitting in that director's office if you hadn't taken a chance on me. After Josh left, Eva placed the card beside dozens of others inside a small drawer she rarely opened. To everyone else, they were thank you notes. To Eva, they were quiet reminders that the most important part of her job had never been filling vacancies. It had always been opening the first door for someone ready to walk through it. Late that afternoon, another knock came at Eva's office door. Before she could answer, Josh stepped inside with a smile on his face. Several employees passing through the hallway greeted him as he walked toward Eva's office. As one of the company's directors, Josh managed one of Stone Gems' highest-performing divisions. But long before he had earned that title, he had once been another nervous applicant sitting across the same desk where Naya had spent the afternoon. I heard you're interviewing for operations again, Josh said as he leaned against the doorway. Luke told me you found someone promising. Eva smiled. Maybe. Time will tell, Josh laughed. That's what you told me 20 years ago. Eva remembered the conversation immediately. Josh's resume hadn't impressed many people at the time. He lacked management experience and had competed against applicants with stronger qualifications. Several executives had preferred someone else. Eva had asked for one interview before making the final recommendation. After an hour of conversation, she walked into the hiring committee meeting and recommended Josh without hesitation. It turned out to be one of the best hiring decisions she had ever made. Josh glanced around the office before his eyes settled on one of the handwritten thank you cards displayed on the shelf behind Eva's desk. You still keep all of those? He asked. Eva nodded. Every single one, Josh smiled. Good, because I never thanked you enough. Eva looked up from the papers on her desk. Josh continued before she had a chance to respond. When I walked into this building for my interview, I thought I was competing for a job. I didn't realize someone was about to change the direction of my life. Eva smiled but said nothing. She had heard similar words before, but they never became ordinary. Josh checked the time on his watch before heading back toward the door. I have another meeting. He stopped for a moment before leaving. Whoever that new candidate is, if you believe in her, I already know she'll do just fine. After Josh walked away, Eva looked toward the shelf behind her desk again. The thank you cards, photographs, and handwritten notes were never reminders of her own success. They reminded her that every hiring decision carried a responsibility far greater than simply choosing the most impressive resume. A few weeks later, Eva began noticing the same topic appearing in business magazines, leadership newsletters, and executive meetings. Artificial intelligence was quickly becoming the biggest conversation in corporate America. Companies were using it to automate routine work, analyze data, reduce costs, and improve efficiency. Recruitment was starting to appear in those discussions as well. One afternoon, Luke walked into Ava's office holding his phone. "Have you seen this?" he asked, handing it to her. The article described a national corporation that had started using AI to screen thousands of job applications before any recruiter reviewed them. "They say it can process more resumes in an hour than an entire hiring team can review in a week," Luke said. Ava read the article, then handed the phone back. "I don't doubt it," Luke studied her face. "You're not concerned?" Ava smiled. "Why should I be?" Luke pulled out a chair and sat down. "If AI keeps getting better, companies might decide they don't need as many recruiters." Ava folded the resume she had been reviewing and set it aside. "If AI can take care of repetitive work, then recruiters finally have more time to do the part that matters," Luke frowned. "Which part?" Eva looked toward the interview room across the hallway where another candidate had just arrived. "Listening," Luke followed her gaze. Eva continued. "Technology can organize information faster than any recruiter ever could, but it still can't sit across from someone and understand why they made the choices that shaped their life." She stood and gathered the next interview folder. "If recruiters spend less time sorting resumes, they should spend more time understanding people." Luke nodded slowly. The idea made sense, even if he had never thought about it that way before. Eva walked toward the interview room and paused at the door. "Technology changes every profession eventually." She smiled before opening the door. "The important thing is knowing which part of your job should never be handed over." At the time, neither of them realized that conversation would become far more personal than either of them expected. As employees gradually left the office, the lights across the floor began switching off one department after another. Eva remained at her desk long enough to organize the interview notes she would need the following morning before finally shutting down her computer. She took one last look around her office, making sure nothing had been left unfinished. It was another ordinary day, much like hundreds of others she had experienced over the past 25 years. Outside the building, the evening traffic filled the streets of downtown Minneapolis as Eva began the drive home. During the ride, her phone rang once. The screen showed Peter's name. She answered through the car's hands-free system. "Are you on your way?" Peter asked. "I just left the office." "Dinner will be ready when you get home," Eva smiled. "I'll be there soon." After ending the call, she continued driving through the city she had crossed almost every weekday for half of her adult life. She had no reason to believe tomorrow would be any different. Stone Gems still felt like the place where she would eventually finish her career, just as she had imagined for years. What Eva didn't know was that the world outside her office had already begun changing. Across the country, more and more companies were embracing artificial intelligence, restructuring departments, and rethinking jobs that had once depended entirely on human experience. Before long, that same wave would arrive at Stone Gems and force the company to make a decision no one would have imagined only a few years earlier. For more than 25 years, Eva's daily routine had barely changed. She usually arrived at Stone Gems before most employees and often remained in the office long after the parking lot had begun to empty. Some evenings she skipped lunch without noticing. Other days she looked up from her computer only to realize the sun had already set outside her office window. Her calendar stayed filled with interviews, leadership meetings, hiring discussions, and calls with department managers. Every time she crossed one task off the schedule, another was already waiting. Peter had long since stopped asking what time she would be home. Instead, he simply sent a short message whenever dinner was ready. "Take your time. I'll leave a plate for you." Most nights, Eva read the message hours later while packing her briefcase. She always replied with the same promise. "I'm leaving now." Sometimes she meant it. Sometimes another meeting kept her at the office for another hour. One evening, she finally walked through the front door close to 9 o'clock. Peter was sitting in the kitchen, reading a book while her dinner rested in the oven to keep it warm. He smiled the moment he heard the door open. "Long day?" Eva laughed as she slipped off her shoes. "A little longer than I planned." Peter closed his book and carried her plate to the table. "One of these days, I'm going to eat dinner with you before it gets cold." Eva smiled apologetically. "I'll try." Peter smiled back because they both knew she wasn't making a promise she could keep. One evening, Eva arrived home nearly an hour later than she had expected. Peter was already setting dinner on the table while Milo waited patiently beside him, hoping someone would accidentally drop a piece of food. Eva placed her handbag near the door before taking a seat across from her husband. They spent the first few minutes talking about ordinary things. Lion had called earlier that afternoon, Taylor planned to visit over the weekend, and Peter had finally finished redesigning part of the backyard after putting it off for months. As dinner continued, Eva rested her fork on the plate and looked at Peter for a moment before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" Peter smiled. "Of course." Eva hesitated longer than usual. "Have I spent too much of my life working?" Peter didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair as though he had been asked a question that deserved more than a quick response. "Why are you asking now?" Eva gave a small smile. "Sometimes I wonder if I gave Stone Gems more time than I gave you and the kids." Peter shook his head. "I've never seen it that way." Eva looked surprised. Peter continued, "You never worked because you loved a title or a paycheck. You worked because you believed you were changing people's lives. The kids grew up seeing that. So did I." Eva lowered her eyes toward the table. Peter reached across and gently held her hand. "Would I have liked a few more vacations? Sure. A few more weekends without you answering work calls? Probably. But I never wanted you to stop doing something that gave your life purpose." Eva smiled. It wasn't the first time Peter had reassured her, but hearing those words still meant more than he probably realized. As the years passed, birthdays, anniversaries, and family dinners slowly became dates Eva recognized only after they had already passed. She never forgot because they weren't important. She forgot because every week seemed to arrive with another urgent hiring project, another leadership vacancy, or another department asking for help. Peter never complained. If Eva called to say she would be late, he simply told her not to rush. When Lion and Taylor were younger, they often waited to eat dinner until she came home. As they grew older, they stopped asking how late she would be. They understood the answer was almost always the same. One Saturday morning, Taylor stopped by the house while Eva was preparing for another executive meeting. "Mom, are you really working today?" Eva glanced at the documents, spread across the dining table. "Just for a few hours," Taylor smiled. "That's what you said last weekend." Eva looked at the clock, then back at the reports she still needed to finish. "I'm sorry." Taylor walked over and kissed her on the cheek. "You don't have to apologize. I know your job matters." She picked up her purse and headed for the door before turning back with a small smile. "I just hope one day it doesn't need you quite so much." Eva watched her leave, then looked down at the reports waiting on the table. A few minutes later, she picked them up and drove to the office, believing there would always be another weekend to spend with her family. One afternoon, while reviewing interview schedules for the following week, Eva noticed one of the newer recruiters standing outside her office with a folder pressed against his chest. He hesitated for a few seconds before knocking on the open door. "Do you have a minute?" Eva looked up from her computer and smiled. "Come in." The young recruiter stepped inside and placed the folder on her desk. "I've interviewed this candidate twice already. His resume is excellent, his answers check every box, and everyone else thinks we should hire him. But something doesn't feel right." Eva closed the document she had been working on and pulled the folder toward her. "What doesn't feel right?" "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I can't explain it." Eva didn't open the resume immediately. Instead, she asked, "What was the first question you asked him?" The recruiter thought for a moment. "I asked him to introduce himself. And after that?" "I went through his experience, his achievements, and why he wanted to join Stone Gems." Eva smiled. "You interviewed his resume." The recruiter looked puzzled. "Tomorrow, invite him back." "For a third interview?" Eva nodded. "But don't ask about his resume." "Then what should I ask?" Eva leaned back in her chair. "Ask him about the hardest coworker he has ever worked with." The recruiter waited for more. "And then?" "Listen. That's all?" "That's usually enough." The following afternoon, the recruiter returned to Eva's office carrying the same folder. Before he even sat down, Eva could already tell from the expression on his face that the interview had gone differently. "I understand now," he said. Eva smiled. "What changed?" He spent 10 minutes explaining why every difficult project was someone else's fault. Every failure had someone else to blame. Eva nodded. "Did you find that on his resume?" "No." Did any AI tool tell you that? The recruiter smiled and shook his head. No, Eva tapped the folder gently with her pen. A resume tells you what someone has done. AI can organize information, compare qualifications, and save you hours of work. But neither of them can tell you who a person becomes when things stop going their way. The recruiter sat quietly for a moment before asking one last question. After 25 years, do you still trust a conversation more than a resume? Eva smiled. I trust a resume to tell me whether someone can do the job. She paused for a second before continuing. I trust a conversation to tell me whether I'd want everyone else working with them. The recruiter thanked her, picked up the folder, and left the office. A few minutes later, another candidate walked through Eva's door. She greeted them with the same smile she had given thousands of people before. Every interview started with different questions, but Eva was always searching for the same answer. She wanted to know who was sitting across the table, not just what was written on the paper in front of her. That Friday, Eva left the office a little earlier than usual. There were no interviews scheduled after 4 o'clock, and for the first time that week, she drove home while the afternoon sun was still high above Minneapolis. As she pulled into the driveway, Milo was already waiting by the front window. The moment he recognized her car, he rushed toward the front door before Peter even had a chance to open it. Eva laughed as the golden retriever greeted her with enough excitement to make it seem as though she had been away for weeks instead of a single day. Easy, buddy, she said, rubbing his head while stepping inside. Peter walked over with a smile. Looks like someone missed you. I think he just wants to know if I brought him anything, Peter laughed. You know him too well. A few minutes later, the three of them were in the backyard. Peter tossed a tennis ball across the lawn while Milo chased after it with endless energy. Eva stood watching them for a moment before joining in. She picked up the ball after Milo dropped it at her feet and threw it as far as she could. Peter smiled as he watched his wife laugh with the dog. Moments like these had become surprisingly rare over the years. Most Fridays, Eva was still sitting in her office, finishing interviews while Peter waited at home. Today was different. As they sat together on the patio afterward, Peter poured 2 cups of coffee. Taylor called this afternoon, he said. She wants everyone over on Sunday. Lion will be there too, Eva smiled. It's been a while since we've all had lunch together, Peter nodded. She's already planning the menu. Eva picked up her coffee. Then I guess I don't have a choice. Peter looked at her with a grin. Any interviews this Sunday? Eva laughed. No. Emergency meetings? No. Candidates calling during lunch? Eva shook her head. No, Peter smiled. Good. I think your children deserve to have their mother all to themselves for one afternoon. Eva laughed with him, but the words stayed with her. Peter hadn't said them to make her feel guilty. He never had. He simply appreciated every moment when work didn't interrupt their family. Sitting there with Peter beside her and Milo asleep at their feet, Eva realized how peaceful an ordinary evening could feel when she arrived home before dark. A few days later, Trent called a meeting with senior executives to discuss the company's long-term strategy. Around the conference table sat department heads, financial leaders, and directors responsible for planning StoneGem's future. After reviewing several growth reports, Trent moved to the final item on the agenda. Every industry is changing faster than ever, he said. If we want StoneGems to stay competitive, we have to change with it. The presentation screen shifted to a new slide. Artificial intelligence strategy. Toby stood and walked to the front of the room. Over the past year, AI has become a practical tool for handling work that used to require large teams. Companies across the country are already using it to reduce costs, improve efficiency, and shorten decision-making. He changed to the next slide. Several well-known corporations had already introduced AI into customer service, finance, logistics, and recruitment. The numbers were difficult to ignore. Hiring costs had dropped. Recruitment cycles had become shorter. Administrative work had been reduced dramatically. Trent looked around the room. I'm not interested in replacing people simply because technology exists. He paused before continuing. But I am interested in understanding where technology can help us work smarter. Most executives nodded in agreement. The discussion that followed wasn't about eliminating departments. It focused on where automation could remove repetitive work and allow employees to spend more time on decisions that required experience. When the meeting ended, nobody believed the changes would happen overnight. They expected months of planning, testing, and gradual implementation. Sitting quietly near the end of the table, Eva gathered her notes without saying much. She wasn't worried about AI itself. She had already accepted that technology would continue changing recruitment, just as every generation of new tools had changed the workplace before it. What she couldn't know was that, over the following months, the discussion about improving efficiency would slowly evolve into a very different conversation, one that would eventually include her own position. Over the next few months, artificial intelligence stopped feeling like another topic people discussed over lunch. It found its way into board meetings, quarterly reports, recruiting conferences, and nearly every business newsletter Eva read on her way to work. Every week seemed to bring another headline about companies cutting costs by reducing headcount while investing more heavily in AI. At first, Eva simply read those stories out of curiosity. She had seen countless business trends come and go during her career, and most of them eventually settled into something far less dramatic than people predicted. This one felt different. One afternoon, while organizing interview schedules, her phone rang. The name on the screen belonged to a former colleague she hadn't spoken to in months. After a few minutes of catching up, the conversation turned in an unexpected direction. "They eliminated half of our recruiting department last week," her friend said. "Half?" Eva asked. "The company says AI can handle most of the screening now. They only kept a few senior recruiters." Eva sat quietly, listening as her friend described years of experience disappearing in a single meeting. Before ending the call, her friend asked one question that stayed with Eva long afterward. "Has Stone Gems started talking about AI yet?" Eva glanced through the glass wall of her office toward recruiters moving from one interview room to another. "Not like that," she answered. "At least, not yet." She ended the call and returned to the interview schedule in front of her. But for the first time in years, her attention wasn't completely on the candidates waiting outside. The stories she had been reading for months no longer belonged to other companies. They were beginning to sound much closer to home. Unlike many employees approaching retirement, Eva never believed experience alone was enough. Every time Stone Gems introduced a new hiring platform, she volunteered to learn it before anyone asked. When AI-assisted recruitment tools became available for testing, she signed up for the first training session. Some coworkers were surprised. "I thought you'd be the last person interested in AI." One recruiter joked during the workshop. Eva smiled. "Why? You've been doing this successfully for 25 years. Eva looked at the new software displayed on her screen. "That's exactly why I should learn it." Over the following weeks, she spent hours testing the system with real hiring data. She compared AI recommendations with her own evaluations, studying where they agreed and where they differed. She quickly realized the software excelled at sorting information. Within seconds, it organized applications into clear priorities and highlighted the candidates most likely to deserve a closer look. Tasks that once consumed hours could now be finished before her morning coffee grew cold. Eva welcomed the change. The faster the software handled paperwork, the more time she had to prepare meaningful interviews instead of reading stacks of resumes. When Luke stopped by her office one afternoon, he found her reviewing an AI-generated candidate report beside her own interview notes. "So," he asked with a grin, "what's the verdict?" Eva smiled without looking up. "It's very good at finding people worth meeting." She closed the report and picked up her notebook. "The conversation still decides whether they're worth hiring." Luke nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Neither of them imagined that, before long, some executives would begin believing the first step was all they really needed. One afternoon, Luke walked into Eva's office carrying 2 interview packets. "I need your opinion again," Eva smiled. "Another difficult decision?" Luke placed both files on her desk. The AI ranked candidate a much higher. Better experience, stronger qualifications, more certifications. Candidate B doesn't come close on paper. Eva read through both reports without saying anything. When she finished, she closed the folders and looked at Luke. "Have either of them been interviewed yet?" Luke shook his head. "Not yet." Eva slid the files back toward him. "Then let's wait until we've actually met them." Later that afternoon, they interviewed the first candidate. Everything matched the resume. The answers were polished, the accomplishments were impressive, and every response sounded carefully prepared. After the candidate left, Luke smiled. "I understand why the AI ranked this one first." Eva simply nodded and called in the second candidate. The interview unfolded differently. Instead of listing achievements, the candidate spoke about difficult projects that hadn't gone as planned, admitted personal mistakes without shifting blame, and explained how those experiences had changed the way they led people. When the interview ended, Luke sat quietly for a moment before looking back at both folders. "I didn't expect that," Eva smiled. Neither did the report. Luke glanced between the interview notes and the AI ranking. "So which one would you hire?" Eva answered without hesitation. The second candidate, Luke looked surprised. "Even with the weaker resume?" Eva nodded. "The resume showed us who had accomplished more." She closed the file. "The interview showed us who I'd trust when the job became difficult." Luke slowly nodded. For the first time, he understood why Eva never made hiring decisions before meeting the person sitting across the table. The reports helped narrow the search. The conversation decided the outcome. A few days later, Stone Gems organized an internal training session introducing new AI recruiting tools to managers and human resources staff. Eva arrived with a notebook in one hand and took a seat near the front of the room. Around her, many of the younger employees moved comfortably through demonstrations that felt completely natural to them. They explored new features with confidence, asked detailed questions, and exchanged ideas with one another as if they had been using similar technology for years. Eva followed every step carefully, writing notes whenever the presenter explained something unfamiliar. There were moments when she needed to ask the instructor to repeat part of the demonstration, and there were moments when she realized the younger recruiters understood a concept long before she did. None of that embarrassed her. During a short break, one of the recruiters in his 20s walked over to her table. "Would you like me to show you a shortcut?" he asked. Eva smiled. "Please." For the next 15 minutes, the two of them sat side by side while he explained several features that made the software much easier to use. Eva listened carefully, asked questions whenever something wasn't clear, and wrote down every answer. Before returning to the session, she thanked him for taking the time to help. The young recruiter smiled. "Honestly, I should be thanking you." Eva looked surprised. "Why?" "Because everything I know about this software came from online videos. Everything I know about interviewing people came from watching you." Eva laughed softly. "Then maybe we're learning from each other." By the end of the afternoon, she left the training session with pages of notes, several new skills, and a stronger appreciation for what AI could accomplish. At the same time, she became even more certain that technology worked best when it supported experienced people instead of replacing them. That evening, Peter found Eva sitting at the dining table with her laptop still open long after dinner. Milo was asleep beside her chair while pages of handwritten notes surrounded a half-finished cup of coffee. Peter walked over, glanced at the screen, and recognized another AI course playing in the background. "You're studying again?" he asked. Eva smiled without looking away from the screen. "Just one more lesson." Peter pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. "You've been saying just one more lesson every night this week." Eva laughed before finally closing the laptop. "Maybe." Peter looked at the notebook in front of her. Every page was filled with notes, highlighted sentences, and reminders she had written herself. "How's it going?" Eva leaned back in her chair for a moment before answering. "Better than I expected. So AI isn't as scary as people make it sound?" Eva shook her head. "No. Actually, it's impressive." Peter looked surprised by her answer. "Really? It saves time. It organizes information better than I ever could. It catches patterns I might miss after reading hundreds of resumes." Peter smiled. "That sounds like a good thing." "It is." Eva paused for a second before continuing. "I just keep wondering where the line is." Peter waited. "The line?" Eva nodded. "Where does AI stop? And where does human judgment have to begin?" Peter didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for her notebook and flipped through several pages before closing it again. "Can I ask you something?" Eva smiled. Of course. If AI had interviewed Josh 20 years ago, Eva already knew where the question was going. "I don't think he would have been hired," Peter nodded. "But you hired him, because I met him." The room fell quiet for a few seconds. Peter looked at his wife before asking one final question. "Do you think companies will still believe that a few years from now?" Eva didn't answer right away. She looked toward the closed laptop sitting in front of her. "I hope they do." It wasn't certainty. It was hope. And for the first time in a very long career, Eva realized she wasn't completely sure those two things were still the same. The following weeks passed much like every busy hiring season before them. Eva continued interviewing candidates during the day and learning more about artificial intelligence at night. She gradually became comfortable using new tools and even encouraged the recruiters on her team to adopt them whenever they genuinely improved the hiring process. No one at Stone Gems questioned her willingness to learn. In fact, several younger employees admired the way someone with 25 years of experience still approached new technology with curiosity instead of resistance. Even so, small changes began appearing across the company. Meetings about operating costs became more frequent. Executives spent longer hours inside conference rooms. Budget discussions started replacing expansion plans. Rumors quietly spread from one department to another whenever another meeting ended behind closed doors. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone could feel the atmosphere changing. One afternoon, while walking past one of the conference rooms on her way to another interview, Eva noticed Trent and Toby leaving a meeting with several members of the executive team. Their conversation stopped the moment they stepped into the hallway. They greeted Eva with polite smiles before continuing toward the executive offices. Eva didn't think much about it at first. Executive meetings had always been part of running a large company. Still, something about the expressions on their faces stayed with her for the rest of the afternoon. Later that evening, as she organized the next day's interview schedule before heading home, she noticed a company-wide email appear in her inbox. Executive Town Hall Meeting. Mandatory attendance. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. No agenda had been included. Eva closed her computer, picked up her handbag, and switched off the lights in her office. As she walked through the quiet hallway toward the elevators, she couldn't shake the feeling that the meeting wasn't going to be about quarterly results or another software update. Whatever the executives had been discussing behind those closed doors was about to affect everyone inside Stone Gems. Monday morning felt different before anyone said a single word. Employees arrived earlier than usual, gathered in small groups near the coffee machines, and quietly wondered why every department had been asked to attend the executive meeting. Eva noticed the same question on nearly every face she passed on her way to the auditorium. Normally, people chatted about weekend plans or upcoming projects before company meetings. That morning, conversations stopped the moment someone admitted they had no idea what the meeting was about. Eva found a seat beside Luke while hundreds of employees gradually filled the room. A few minutes later, Trent walked onto the stage with Toby following several steps behind. Neither of them smiled as they usually did before company-wide announcements. The room became silent almost immediately. Trent thanked everyone for coming before taking a slow breath. Over the past 18 months, the business environment has changed faster than any of us expected. Rising operating costs, increasing competition, and rapid advances in artificial intelligence are forcing companies across every industry to rethink how they operate. Stone Gems is no different. Nobody moved, Trent continued. Over the coming months, we will begin restructuring several departments while investing heavily in AI-driven systems that will allow us to operate more efficiently in the future. The words were professional, calm, carefully prepared. Even so, everyone in the room understood what they meant. Restructuring rarely happened without people losing their jobs. Eva looked around the auditorium. Some employees lowered their heads. Others stared silently at the stage, waiting for Trent to explain what would happen next. Department leaders will begin meeting with affected employees over the coming weeks, Trent said. These decisions are not a reflection of anyone's dedication or contribution. They are decisions we believe are necessary for the company's future. The meeting ended only a few minutes later, but nobody hurried back to work. The conversations that followed were much quieter than the ones before it had begun. Over the following weeks, rumors slowly became reality. Every few days, another employee disappeared from the office after a private meeting with management. Desks were cleaned out before the end of the day. Farewell emails quietly appeared in inboxes the following morning. No department escaped the restructuring. Some teams lost one employee. Others lost several. Every time someone left, another conversation spread through the office as people tried to guess whose turn might come next. Eva watched familiar faces disappear one after another, including people she had worked beside for years. She attended retirement lunches that had never been planned, shook hands with employees who hadn't expected their careers to end that way, and wished them well as they walked out of Stone Gems carrying cardboard boxes filled with photographs, coffee mugs, and years of memories. Through it all, Eva continued doing the same work she had always done. Interviews remained on her calendar. Recruiters still came to her office asking for advice. Candidates continued walking through her door, hoping to begin careers at Stone Gems. The work hadn't stopped. Only the atmosphere had changed. Every morning, people arrived wondering whether they would still have a desk by the end of the week. Every afternoon, everyone felt relieved simply because their phone hadn't rung with a request to visit human resources. Eva understood those emotions better than most. She had spent 25 years helping people begin careers. Now she was watching careers end almost every week. Nearly 3 months after the restructuring began, Eva walked into the office one Monday morning and immediately noticed something different. The floor had grown noticeably quieter. Many of the desks that had once been occupied every day now sat empty, their computer monitors turned off and family photographs long gone. The people she greeted every morning had become fewer with each passing week. She stood for a moment outside her office before looking across the department. Luke was already at his desk, but the smile he usually greeted her with was nowhere to be found. A few minutes later, he knocked softly on her open door. He didn't sit down right away. Instead, he closed the door behind him and remained standing. Eva looked up from the interview schedule she had been reviewing. "What's wrong?" Luke let out a slow breath before placing a folder on her desk. It wasn't an interview file. It was a restructuring report. Eva looked at it for only a second before lifting her eyes back toward Luke. She already understood. Luke pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "I've been hoping this conversation wouldn't happen." Eva remained silent. The executive team finalized the next phase yesterday. Luke paused before continuing. "You're the last position in our department." The room became completely still. Eva looked down at the folder without opening it. She didn't ask whether the decision had already been made because she already knew the answer. If Luke had been sent to speak with her, there was nothing left to discuss. After several quiet seconds, Eva looked back at him. "When?" Luke swallowed before answering. "Friday." Eva gave a small nod. No anger, no disbelief. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the day she had expected for months had finally arrived. Luke lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." Eva offered him a faint smile. "This wasn't your decision." Luke didn't respond. He had worked beside Eva long enough to know how much she loved the company. Watching this happen felt just as painful for him as it did for her. The executive conference room was unusually quiet that morning. Department directors, senior managers, and executives filled every seat around the long table. Conversations faded as Trent walked in and took his place at the front of the room. No one expected anything unusual. Quarterly leadership meetings had always focused on growth, hiring, and long-term planning. Trent picked up the remote, and the first slide appeared behind him, building the next generation of Stone Gems. "Over the past several months," he began, "our leadership team has been evaluating how artificial intelligence can improve the way we operate." The presentation moved through familiar topics: automation, efficiency, lower operating costs, faster decision-making. Several executives nodded as Toby presented the financial projections. The numbers showed that companies adopting AI were reducing administrative costs while completing work in far less time. Then the presentation changed. A new slide appeared: organizational restructuring. The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. Toby looked around the table before continuing. "After months of testing, we've identified several areas where automation has significantly reduced the amount of manual work required." No one spoke. Everyone understood where the discussion was heading. Trent took over again. "These decisions weren't made lightly. We reviewed every department carefully before approving this plan." He paused for a moment. "Our goal isn't simply to reduce costs. It's to prepare Stone Gems for the next decade." He pressed the remote one more time. The screen changed again. Recruitment division. Eva raised her eyes toward the presentation. Trent looked across the room before speaking. "As part of this restructuring, the position of Senior Director of Talent Strategy will be eliminated." The room fell silent. No one needed to ask whose position he was talking about. Every person around the table knew there had only ever been one Senior Director of Talent Strategy at Stone Gems. Eva sat quietly, her expression unchanged, while several executives glanced in her direction before looking back at the screen. No one had expected the company's biggest restructuring announcement to begin with the woman who had spent 25 years helping build its workforce. No one spoke after Trent finished. The silence lingered as Eva slowly reached for the folder that had been placed in front of her. She opened it without rushing. Inside was the restructuring plan, a transition schedule, and the severance package prepared for her position. She read every page before closing the folder and placing both hands on top of it. Then she looked at Trent. "May I ask one question?" "Of course," he replied. "Is this decision based on my performance?" Trent answered without hesitation. "No," he held her gaze. "Your performance has never been the issue." Eva nodded once. "Then it's because you believe the position is no longer necessary." "Yes." Trent didn't avoid the question. The leadership team believes the new recruitment system can handle most of the responsibilities your department has carried. Eva remained quiet for a few seconds before asking one final question. And you agree with that? Trent took a slow breath. I do. Several executives lowered their eyes. No one wanted to watch the conversation, yet no one could look away. Eva gave a small nod. Thank you for answering honestly. She closed the folder and gently slid it back across the table. If this is the direction Stone Gems has chosen, I'll do everything I can to make the transition as smooth as possible. Luke turned toward her. Ava, she met his eyes and smiled. None of this was your decision. Then she looked around the room. The people on my team still deserve my full support until my last day. Josh stared quietly at the notebook in front of him. He remembered the interview that had changed his own career 20 years earlier. Several other executives sat in silence, realizing the woman who had opened thousands of doors for other people was now being asked to walk out of one herself. Eva stood, gathered the folder, and thanked everyone for their time before leaving the conference room. The door closed gently behind her. No one spoke for several seconds. The meeting continued, but no one in the room was thinking about the presentation anymore. Friday arrived more quickly than Eva expected. She spent her final morning exactly the way she had spent thousands of mornings before it. She reviewed interview notes, answered questions from recruiters, signed the last hiring recommendations waiting for her approval, and wished 2 new employees good luck before they began orientation. No one would have guessed it was her final day unless they already knew. Shortly before noon, Luke stopped by her office carrying a small box of donuts. A few members of the human resources team gathered together for a simple farewell. There were no speeches, no formal ceremony, and no attempt to turn the moment into something larger than it needed to be. They shared coffee, laughed about interviews they still remembered years later, and thanked Eva for everything she had taught them. Before everyone returned to work, Luke handed Eva a card signed by the entire department. We wanted you to know. He stopped, searching for the right words. This place won't feel the same without you. Eva smiled warmly. Take care of each other. That afternoon, she carried the cardboard box out of her office for the last time. Several employees passing through the hallway stopped to hug her before she reached the elevator. Josh came downstairs from another meeting just in time to see her leaving. Without saying a word, he walked over and embraced her. Thank you, he said quietly. Eva smiled. Keep taking care of your people, Josh nodded. I learned that from you. The elevator doors opened. Eva stepped inside, holding the box against her chest. As the doors slowly closed, she looked once more at the office where she had spent half of her adult life. Then the doors shut, and the elevator carried her down to the lobby. A few minutes later, Eva placed the box inside her car, took one last look at the Stone Gems building, started the engine, and drove away. She didn't know where life would take her next. She only knew that for the first time in 25 years, she wasn't driving home from work. She was driving away from it. The drive home felt much longer than usual. Eva kept both hands on the steering wheel while the city moved quietly past her windshield. She had driven this route thousands of times after another ordinary workday. This afternoon felt completely different. Every traffic light gave her another moment to think about the building she had just left behind. 25 years of memories now belonged to the rearview mirror instead of the road ahead. The radio played softly, but she never noticed what was on. When she pulled into the driveway, Peter was trimming the hedges in the front yard. He smiled as he saw her car, then glanced at his watch. You're home early. Eva stepped out of the car and closed the door behind her. The meeting ended sooner than expected. Peter set the gardening shears aside and walked toward her. Before asking another question, he noticed she was still holding the folder from the meeting. She hadn't let go of it once. Did something happen? Eva looked down at the folder for a moment before answering. I don't work at Stone Gems anymore. Peter didn't ask for an explanation. He simply stepped closer and wrapped his arms around her. Eva rested her forehead against his shoulder and closed her eyes. Neither of them spoke. After 25 years together, Peter had learned there were moments when silence offered more comfort than any words ever could. That evening, after dinner, Eva carried a small cardboard box into the living room and placed it on the coffee table. Peter sat beside her without saying anything. One by one, Eva took out the things she had brought home from her office. A framed family photo. A ceramic mug Luke had given her years earlier after his promotion. A stack of handwritten thank you cards tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Finally, she picked up the small nameplate that had sat outside her office for years. Eva Jones, Senior Director of Talent Strategy. She ran her fingers across the engraved letters before setting it gently on the table. Peter watched quietly. 25 years, he said softly. Eva nodded. It doesn't feel real yet. She opened the bundle of thank you cards and unfolded the first one. It was from Josh, written nearly 20 years earlier. Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself. She smiled, then reached for another. One after another, the cards carried different names, different handwriting, and different stories, but they all shared one thing. They weren't thanking her for giving them a job. They were thanking her for giving them a chance. Peter picked up the nameplate and looked at it for a moment before placing it back in the box. That title meant a lot to you. Eva looked at the box filled with memories from a career she had loved. It still does. She closed the lid and rested both hands on top of it. But it isn't who I am, Peter smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Eva looked at him. Peter reached for her hand. Stone Gems gave you a title. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. The person everyone respected. You built her yourself. Eva smiled for the first time since leaving the office that afternoon. The box remained on the coffee table, but it no longer felt like a box full of things she had lost. It had become a reminder of everything she had already accomplished, no matter where life took her next. Eva's alarm still rang at 5:30 the following Monday. For a few seconds, everything felt exactly the same. She reached over to turn it off before it could wake Peter, climbed out of bed, and walked downstairs as she had done for the past 25 years. She started the coffee maker, prepared breakfast, fed Milo, and opened the back door so he could run across the yard. Nothing about her morning routine had changed. Only when she glanced at the clock did she realize there was nowhere she needed to be. No interviews waiting on her calendar. No department managers stopping by her office. No candidates hoping for a chance to change their lives. The realization caught her by surprise. She looked at her handbag resting on the kitchen chair, already packed the night before out of habit. Peter walked into the kitchen carrying his newspaper as usual, but this morning he noticed Eva wasn't wearing her work clothes. She was still standing beside the counter, holding a coffee mug without taking a sip. Peter looked at the handbag before looking back at his wife. You packed your bag. Eva smiled at herself. I guess I did. Peter walked over, lifted the bag from the chair, and carried it back upstairs. When he returned, he placed another cup of coffee beside Eva. Come sit with me. Eva looked toward the clock again before catching herself. There was no reason to hurry anymore. For the first time in 25 years, she sat across from Peter and finished an entire breakfast without checking the time once. The first few weeks felt unfamiliar. Every morning, Eva still woke before sunrise out of habit. More than once, she reached for her phone to check emails before remembering she no longer had a company inbox waiting for her. One morning, Peter found her sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook open in front of her. Planning your day? He asked. Eva smiled. I think so. Peter poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. Any meetings? Eva shook her head. No interviews? None. Peter laughed. Then what are you going to do? Eva looked at the blank page for a moment before smiling. I honestly don't know. Peter slid one of the coffee cups toward her. Good. Eva looked up. Good? For 25 years, every hour of your day belonged to someone else. He leaned back in his chair. Maybe it's time a few of them belong to you. Eva looked at the empty schedule again. For the first time in decades, she wasn't wondering how to fit life around work. She was learning how to fit work around life. That Sunday, Eva and Peter drove across town to Taylor's house just before noon. Milo sat happily in the back seat, his head pressed against the window as if he knew he was about to see familiar faces. Taylor opened the front door before they even reached it. Mom! Dad! She called, wrapping her arms around both of them before bending down to greet Milo. A few minutes later, Lion arrived, carrying dessert, and the family gathered around the dining table for lunch. The conversation flowed easily from one topic to another. Taylor talked about work, Lion shared stories from a recent project, and Peter somehow managed to make everyone laugh more than once. At one point, Taylor looked across the table at her mother. It's nice not having to check your watch every 10 minutes, Eva smiled. Was I really that bad? Lion laughed. Mom, you once answered a work call while we were cutting your birthday cake. Eva covered her face with one hand and laughed with the rest of the family. I actually did that, didn't I? You did, Taylor said, smiling. We all got used to it. The room fell quiet for a brief moment before Taylor reached across the table and gently squeezed her mother's hand. We're just happy you're here now. Eva looked around the table. For years, she had convinced herself there would always be another weekend, another family lunch, another chance to spend more time together. Sitting there with both of her children laughing over old memories, she realized how many ordinary moments she had unknowingly traded for one more meeting, one more interview, or one more report. This afternoon, no one was waiting for her at the office. For the first time in many years, her family had her full attention. One Friday afternoon, Peter suggested driving to a small lake just outside Minneapolis. Years earlier, Ava would have smiled, checked her calendar, and suggested another weekend instead. This time, she picked up her jacket without asking a single question. They spent the afternoon walking along the shoreline, stopping now and then to watch families fishing from the docks or children racing through the grass. No one recognized Eva there. No one asked about interviews, hiring plans, or executive meetings. She was simply another woman enjoying a quiet afternoon with her husband. As they sat on a wooden bench overlooking the water, Peter smiled. You know what I noticed? Eva turned toward him. What? You haven't looked at your phone once. Eva laughed and pulled it from her pocket. The screen was completely dark. I guess I haven't, Peter smiled. A year ago, that would have been impossible. Eva looked across the lake before slipping the phone back into her pocket. A year ago, I would have been thinking about Monday's meetings. Peter nodded. And today? Eva watched a little girl teaching her younger brother how to skip stones across the water. Today, she smiled. I'm wondering whether I can beat you at that. Peter laughed. Now that's a challenge I'm willing to accept. The two of them walked toward the shoreline, searching for flat stones like a pair of teenagers with nothing more important waiting for them. Eva realized something she had never considered during all those years at Stone Gems. Success had allowed her to build a wonderful life. Slowing down was finally giving her the chance to live it. The weeks passed more peacefully than Eva had expected. She and Peter took short road trips around Minnesota, visited lakes they had driven past for years without stopping, and spent entire afternoons walking with Milo instead of rushing home before sunset. They visited Lion and Taylor more often, shared long family dinners, and celebrated small occasions that would have once been interrupted by phone calls from the office. Little by little, Eva began discovering a life that had always existed outside her career. Even so, something still felt incomplete. Every Monday morning, she found herself wondering what interviews were taking place at Stone Gems. Every time she walked past the small room that had once served as her home office, she instinctively glanced inside before remembering there were no interview schedules waiting for her anymore. One afternoon, while organizing old documents in the garage, she came across a notebook she had carried during her final years at Stone Gems. It contained interview questions, observations about candidates, and small notes she had written after particularly memorable conversations. Eva sat down and flipped through page after page. She smiled when she recognized names that had later become successful managers, directors, and business owners. None of them had been guaranteed success when they first walked into her office. They had simply needed someone willing to believe in them. Eva closed the notebook and rested it on her lap. She didn't miss meetings. She didn't miss paperwork. She didn't even miss the long hours. What she missed were the conversations. She missed watching nervous candidates slowly become comfortable enough to show who they really were. She missed helping someone walk out of her office believing their future had just changed. For the first time since leaving Stone Gems, Eva admitted something she had been trying not to say out loud. She didn't just enjoy recruitment. She genuinely loved it. One evening, Eva and Peter were sitting on the back porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees. Milo lay asleep at their feet while the neighborhood slowly grew quiet. Peter glanced at Eva before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" Eva smiled. "Of course. Do you miss it?" Eva didn't answer immediately. She already knew what he meant. After a long moment, she nodded. "Every day." Peter wasn't surprised. "The work?" Eva smiled faintly. "The conversations. Meeting people. Watching someone walk into an interview nervous and leave believing in themselves." She paused. "I miss helping people find opportunities they didn't think they could reach." Peter leaned back in his chair. "Then why do you keep acting like you have to leave all of that behind?" Eva looked at him. Because I don't want my life to become what it was before, Peter nodded. Neither do I, he reached for her hand. But those are two different decisions. Eva frowned slightly. Peter continued. You can love your work without letting it take over your life. She remained quiet. Peter smiled. For years, you believed you had to choose between being great at your job and being present for your family. He gently squeezed her hand. Maybe that was never the choice at all. Eva looked out across the backyard as his words settled in. She had spent weeks trying to build a new life by walking away from the career she loved. For the first time, she wondered if there might be another path. One where she didn't have to give up either. She smiled at Peter. I think you're a better career coach than you realize, Peter laughed. Good, because my rates are much cheaper than a consultant's. Eva laughed with him, and for the first time since leaving Stone Gems, the future didn't feel like a door that had closed. It felt like one she simply hadn't noticed before. The morning after talking with Peter, Eva carried her laptop to the dining table instead of the backyard. Milo curled up beside her chair while Peter quietly read the newspaper across from her. For several minutes, Eva simply stared at the screen without touching the keyboard. It wasn't because she didn't know where to begin. It was because she couldn't remember the last time she had needed to look for a job. 25 years earlier, she had walked into Stone Gems for an interview with nothing more than a resume and the hope that someone would give her a chance. She never imagined that one company would become her entire career. Now, at 50, she was starting over. She opened the resume she hadn't updated in years. Most people filled several pages with different employers, promotions, and career changes. Eva's resume looked almost unusual. One company, 25 years, thousands of successful hires, dozens of leadership appointments, hundreds of managers developed. She carefully updated every achievement, checked every sentence twice, then pressed save. Peter looked over the top of his newspaper. Finished, Eva smiled. I think so. Peter stood up, walked around the table, and looked at the screen. If I didn't know you, he said, I'd hire you before I reached the second page. Eva laughed. Let's hope someone else thinks the same. She clicked on the first opening for a senior talent acquisition manager in Minneapolis, read through every requirement, attached her resume, and pressed submit. A small confirmation message appeared on the screen. Your application has been received. Eva smiled to herself. It wasn't much, but it felt like the beginning of something. 3 days later, Eva received her first interview invitation. Peter insisted on driving her, even though the office was only 20 minutes away. As they pulled into the parking lot, he looked at her and smiled. You're going to do exactly what you've helped thousands of people do, Eva laughed. Being on this side of the table feels very different. Peter reached over and squeezed her hand. Then remember what you've always told your candidates, Eva smiled. Just have a conversation. The interview began better than Eva expected. The human resources director welcomed her warmly and spent nearly 40 minutes asking about her years at Stone Gems. They talked about difficult hiring decisions, leadership development, employee retention, and the thousands of careers Eva had helped begin. More than once, the interviewer paused to write additional notes. 25 years at one company is rare, she said, and hiring over 3,000 employees, she smiled. That's remarkable. Eva thanked her before answering several more questions. Everything felt natural. It reminded her of conversations she had enjoyed throughout her own career. Near the end of the interview, the director closed Eva's resume and asked one final question. How comfortable are you leading an AI-first recruiting strategy? Eva explained how she had spent months learning new AI tools after leaving Stone Gems. She described the software she had studied, the recruiting platform she had tested, and how she believed artificial intelligence could improve efficiency without replacing human judgment. The director nodded politely and thanked her for the thoughtful answer. They shook hands before Eva left the building. As soon as she stepped outside, she felt quietly confident. It hadn't been a perfect interview, but it had been a good one. Peter looked at her as she climbed into the car. How did it go? Eva smiled. I don't think I could have answered any better. 4 days later, Eva's phone rang while she was watering flowers in the backyard. She recognized the company's number and answered with a hopeful smile. The human resources director thanked her again for taking the time to interview before pausing for a moment. Eva had delivered enough hiring decisions throughout her career to recognize that pause immediately. We've decided to move forward with another candidate, the director said. This wasn't an easy decision. Everyone on the panel was genuinely impressed by your experience. Eva smiled politely, even though the caller couldn't see her. May I ask what made the difference? The director hesitated before answering honestly. Our executive team wants someone who has spent the last several years building AI-driven recruiting systems from the ground up. We believe that's the direction the company needs to go. Eva looked across the yard where Milo was chasing a tennis ball Peter had just thrown. I understand, she replied. Thank you for letting me know personally. After ending the call, she stood quietly for a few moments before returning the watering can to the garden. Peter walked over as soon as he saw her expression. Not this one? Eva shook her head. No, Peter waited. What did they say? Eva gave a small smile. They loved my experience. Peter smiled back. That sounds promising. Eva looked toward him. They hired someone with less experience, but more experience building recruitment around AI. Peter didn't answer right away. He simply placed one hand on her shoulder as the two of them stood silently in the backyard. It was the first rejection Eva had received in 25 years. Somehow, hearing that her experience was admired but no longer enough hurt more than she expected. Eva refused to let one rejection decide the rest of her career. The following week, she updated a few details on her resume, rewrote her cover letter, and submitted applications to several more companies around Minneapolis. Before each interview, Peter helped straighten her jacket, wished her good luck at the front door, and watched her drive away with the same smile he had worn throughout their marriage. Each time Eva returned home, Peter asked the same question before she even stepped inside. How did it go? And each time, Eva gave almost the same answer. The conversation went really well. She wasn't exaggerating. The interviews genuinely went well. Hiring managers smiled when they saw she had spent 25 years at one company. They were impressed by the number of employees she had recruited, the leaders she had helped discover, and the departments she had helped build. Several interviewers admitted they had never met someone with that level of experience. During one interview, a vice president of human resources closed Eva's resume halfway through the meeting and smiled. Honestly, your background is one of the strongest we've seen this year. Eva thanked him before the conversation continued for another half hour. By the time she walked out of the building, she felt the same quiet confidence she had felt after her first interview. A few days later, another email arrived. We've decided to move forward with another candidate, then another, and another. Different companies, different recruiters, different wording. The outcome never changed. After the third rejection, Eva stopped trying to guess whether an interview had gone well. She had learned that a good conversation no longer guaranteed anything. More often than not, someone else possessed exactly what companies were looking for. One afternoon, Luke called and asked if Eva had time to meet for coffee. They chose a small cafe only a few blocks from Stone Gems, a place they had visited many times during lunch breaks over the years. When Eva walked through the door, Luke was already waiting with 2 cups on the table. He stood to greet her with a warm smile, but she noticed the tiredness in his face almost immediately. They spent the first few minutes catching up. Peter had finally started growing vegetables in the backyard. Taylor was still trying to convince her mother to travel more often. Lion had recently finished another large project at work. Milo, according to Peter, had become completely spoiled now that Eva spent so much time at home. Luke laughed at every story before finally asking the question he had been avoiding. Have you found a new position yet? Eva stirred her coffee for a moment before answering. I've found interviews. Luke understood immediately. But no offers. Eva smiled. Not yet. Luke lowered his eyes toward the table. I'm sorry. Eva laughed softly. You're still apologizing? I probably always will. She reached across the table and gently tapped his hand. You didn't make that decision, Luke nodded, though he didn't look convinced. After a brief silence, Eva changed the subject. How's everyone doing at Stone Gems? Luke hesitated. Busy, Eva smiled. That's not really an answer. Luke looked around the cafe before lowering his voice. Things have been different since the restructuring. Different how? Luke searched for the right words. We're filling positions faster than ever, Eva nodded. That sounds like what the executives wanted. Luke looked back at her. That's what we thought too. He stopped there. He didn't say another word about the company, but Eva had spent 25 years interviewing people for a living. She recognized the expression on his face. Luke wasn't hiding good news. Several weeks later, Eva was organizing books in her home office when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Luke's name. Hi, Luke. Am I catching you at a bad time? Eva smiled. Not at all. What's going on? Luke hesitated for a moment. Things have been different around here. Eva leaned back in her chair. Different how? The new system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Applications move faster. Reports are finished sooner. Nobody can argue with the numbers. He paused. But something still isn't working. Eva listened without interrupting. Managers have started asking for second interviews more often. Teams keep rejecting candidates the system rated highly. A few new hires have already resigned. He let out a quiet sigh. We're spending less time hiring people. He paused again before finishing the thought. And more time hiring for the same position twice. Eva remained silent. She didn't sound pleased. She didn't sound disappointed. She simply listened. Luke continued. It's strange. What is? Eva asked. Nobody says your name during meetings anymore. He gave a small laugh. They don't have to. Eva smiled. People are starting to ask different questions? Exactly. Luke looked around the office before lowering his voice. The conversations aren't about whether AI works, he paused. They're about what it's missing. Eva glanced out the window for a moment. Keep listening, Luke sounded puzzled. That's it? Eva smiled. The answers usually appear after people start asking better questions. After they ended the call, Eva placed her phone on the desk and returned to organizing the bookshelf. She had no idea that, inside Stone Gems, those questions were already making their way toward the executive floor. 9 months after the restructuring, the executive conference room at Stone Gems had become noticeably quieter than it used to be. Trent sat at the head of the table while Toby projected another quarterly report onto the screen. No one looked eager to begin. Over the past 3 quarters, every meeting had ended with another problem that no one had expected after investing millions of dollars into AI-driven recruitment and restructuring. Toby broke the silence first. Revenue is down again. Another executive flipped through the report in front of him. Customer retention has dropped in 3 divisions. A director added, We've also had more first-year resignations than at any point in the last decade. Trent listened without interrupting. He had approved the restructuring because the numbers promised a leaner, faster, more efficient company. On paper, much of that had happened. Recruitment was moving faster than ever. Hiring costs had fallen. Vacant positions were being filled in nearly half the time they had been before. Yet the company's overall performance continued moving in the opposite direction. Trent looked around the room. If we're hiring faster, he asked quietly, why are so many departments telling us they still don't have the right people? No one answered. Over the following week, Trent asked every department director to submit reports explaining why performance had continued declining. One by one, the reports arrived on his desk. At first, the problems appeared unrelated. Sales blamed inconsistent leadership. Operations blamed poor communication. Customer success reported increasing complaints from long-term clients. Manufacturing pointed toward management turnover. Human resources documented higher resignation rates among new hires. By themselves, none of the reports explained much. Together, they revealed something Trent hadn't expected. The people being hired looked outstanding before joining the company. Their resumes were impressive. Their technical assessments scored well. AI consistently ranked them among the strongest applicants. Yet several months later, many struggled to lead teams, work through conflict, accept responsibility, or earn the trust of the people reporting to them. The company wasn't hiring unqualified people. It was hiring the wrong people. The executive conference room felt different from the meetings held months earlier. This time, no one was discussing projected savings or implementation plans. Every report on the table focused on the same issue: hiring results. Trent looked around the room before speaking. Let's start with recruitment. Toby opened the latest performance report. Applications are being processed faster than ever. Administrative costs are down. Average hiring time has dropped by 38%. The numbers sounded encouraging, but no one looked satisfied. Trent turned toward the vice president of operations. How are the new hires performing? The executive hesitated. Some are doing well, he paused. Some aren't staying long enough for us to know. Another director spoke next. We're replacing people more often than we used to. Josh leaned forward. Managers have started requesting additional interviews because they don't fully trust the recommendations anymore. Toby looked up from his report. The AI isn't making mistakes. It's selecting candidates based on the criteria we gave it. Josh nodded. I know, he looked around the table. The problem is that we assumed those criteria were enough. Another executive joined the discussion. "We've hired people with outstanding resumes who struggled to lead their teams." Someone else added, "And we've rejected candidates who probably would have succeeded if we'd spent another 30 minutes talking to them." Silence settled over the room. Trent slowly closed the report in front of him. "So let me ask a different question." Every eye turned toward the CEO. "Have we been measuring the wrong things?" No one answered immediately. After several seconds, Josh spoke quietly. "I think we've been measuring everything we could," he paused. "We just stopped measuring the things that mattered most." Trent leaned back in his chair. The discussion had started with numbers. It had ended with something no report on the table could calculate: judgment. After the meeting ended, Trent returned to his office, carrying one question he couldn't stop thinking about. What had changed? The company had invested in better technology. Recruitment had become faster. Reports had become more detailed. Hiring costs had dropped. On paper, almost everything looked better than it had a year earlier. Yet the company itself felt weaker. Trent opened several hiring files from before the restructuring and placed them beside reports completed over the past 9 months. At first, he couldn't see much of a difference. Both groups of candidates had strong resumes. Both had passed interviews. Both had received high recommendations. Then something caught his attention. The older files weren't filled with scores, charts, or rankings. They contained handwritten notes in the margins. Listens before answering. Takes responsibility without making excuses. Admits mistakes instead of hiding them. Would earn trust from the team. Calm under pressure. Trent continued turning page after page. Every report contained observations that couldn't be measured by software or reduced to a numerical score. He reached the signature at the bottom of another file. Eva Jones. Then another. Eva Jones. Almost every report carried her name. Trent leaned back in his chair as an old memory returned. Years earlier, he had asked Eva why she spent so much longer interviewing candidates than everyone else in the department. Eva had smiled before answering. "Because I'm not hiring someone for today's opening. I'm hiring the person they'll become after they've been here for 5 years." At the time, Trent admired the answer without thinking much about it. Now, for the first time, he understood exactly what she had meant. The meeting ended, but Trent remained in the conference room. One by one, the executives gathered their reports and quietly walked out. Josh was the last to reach the door before Trent called his name. "Josh," he turned around. "Yes?" Trent held up the hiring report. "If we decided to rebuild the recruitment process," he paused, "who would you trust to lead it?" Josh didn't answer immediately. He already knew the name that had come to mind. "Do you want my honest opinion?" Trent nodded. "That's the only reason I'm asking." Josh leaned against the table. "No software is going to solve this." Trent remained silent. "Neither will another consulting firm." He looked directly at the CEO. "We already had the person who understood this better than anyone else." Trent lowered his eyes to the report in front of him. He already knew where the conversation was heading. Josh continued. "When we let Eva go, we thought we were replacing a position." He shook his head. "What we actually lost was 25 years of judgment." The room fell quiet again. Trent looked out through the conference room window toward the Minneapolis skyline. For months, he had focused on improving efficiency, reducing costs, and preparing the company for the future. Now he realized they had overlooked something much harder to replace than experience: trust. He turned back to Josh. "Do you think she'd even consider coming back?" Josh smiled faintly. "I don't know," he paused. "But if I were you," he looked at Trent for a moment, "I'd make the call before another company does." After Josh left, Trent remained alone in the room. He picked up his phone, scrolled until he found Eva's number, and rested his thumb above the screen. Then he lowered the phone without calling. For the first time since becoming CEO, asking someone to return felt far more difficult than asking them to leave. The next morning, Trent arrived at his office earlier than usual. He placed his briefcase on the floor, looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Minneapolis, and set a cup of coffee on his desk without taking a sip. Ava's phone number was still open on his screen from the night before. More than once, he reached for the phone, then stopped. He had delivered difficult news to employees throughout his career. This felt different. He had never expected to call someone back after deciding their position no longer existed. Nearly 20 minutes passed before he finally picked up the phone and pressed the call button. Across town, Eva was watering flowers in the backyard when her phone began to ring. She set the watering can aside, wiped her hands on a towel, and glanced at the screen. Trent Collins. She looked at the name for a moment before answering. "Good morning, Trent." There was a brief pause before he spoke. "Good morning, Eva." His voice sounded calm, but she could hear the hesitation behind it. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," Eva smiled. "Not at all." Trent took a slow breath. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to meet with me." Eva didn't answer immediately. "About what?" Trent looked at the city outside his office window. "I'd rather explain it in person." Eva could tell this wasn't a casual conversation. "When?" "Whenever it's convenient for you," she thought for a moment. "Tomorrow morning?" Relief slipped into Trent's voice before he could hide it. "That would be perfect. At the office?" Eva asked. Trent shook his head before realizing she couldn't see him. "No," he smiled faintly. "I'd prefer somewhere quieter." Eva nodded. "I know a small cafe not far from the river." "I'll be there." After ending the call, Trent slowly set his phone back on the desk. The meeting was arranged, but he still had no idea whether Eva would even consider what he was about to ask. Across town, Eva slipped her phone into her pocket and picked up the watering can again. She wasn't wondering why Trent wanted to meet. She was wondering what had changed enough to make him call. The next morning, Eva chose the navy blue blazer she had worn during countless executive meetings at Stone Gems. Peter noticed it the moment she walked downstairs. "You haven't worn that in a while," Eva smiled. "I guess it still fits." Peter poured coffee into her travel mug before handing it to her. "Nervous? A little?" Before she left, Peter gently straightened the collar of her blazer. "Remember something," Eva looked at him. "You don't need this meeting. They're the ones who asked for it." Eva smiled, kissed him on the cheek, rubbed Milo behind the ears, and drove toward the small cafe by the river where she and Trent had agreed to meet. She arrived a few minutes early and chose a table beside the window overlooking the water. The morning crowd was still light. People chatted quietly over coffee while servers moved between the tables. Eva wrapped both hands around the warm cup in front of her and looked out the window for a moment. Less than a year earlier, she had believed her career had ended forever. Now the CEO of the company that had let her go was asking to meet again. A few minutes later, the cafe door opened. Trent stepped inside, spotted Eva near the window, and walked toward her with a polite smile. "Thank you for coming," he said. Eva stood to greet him. "Good morning, Trent." They shook hands before taking their seats across from one another. Neither of them reached for their coffee. Both knew they hadn't come to talk about the weather. For a few quiet moments, neither of them spoke. The soft sounds of conversations and coffee cups filled the cafe as Trent finally reached for the folders he had brought with him. He placed them on the table between them and took a slow breath. "I've replayed our last meeting more times than I can count." Eva listened without interrupting. "When we restructured the company, I believed we were making the right decision." He paused before continuing. "I believed technology could replace far more of our recruitment process than it actually could." Eva remained silent. She wasn't interested in defending herself. She wanted to hear why he had asked her back. Trent slid the reports a little closer to Eva. "These are reports from the past 9 months." Eva began reading. Employee turnover had increased. Department performance had declined. Leadership evaluations had become noticeably weaker. Several managers hired after the restructuring had already resigned or been replaced. Trent watched as Eva turned each page. "Recruitment became faster," he said. "Hiring became cheaper. AI did exactly what we expected it to do." Eva closed the final report. "But the company didn't become stronger," Trent nodded. "No." The room fell quiet again. Finally, Eva looked at him. "AI didn't make those hiring decisions." Trent looked back at her. "No, people did." Trent slowly nodded once more. "And that's the mistake I didn't understand until it was too late." Trent folded his hands on the table and took a slow breath before speaking again. "Eva, I'd like you to come back to Stone Gems." Eva looked at him without saying a word. Trent continued. "Not because we want things to go back to the way they were. They can't. The company has changed, and AI will continue to be part of how we operate." Eva nodded slightly. She expected that much. Trent leaned forward. "What we need back is your judgment." Eva remained quiet. Trent continued. "Over the past 9 months, we've learned that AI can tell us who meets the requirements. It can't tell us who will earn the trust of a team, who will take responsibility when projects fail, or who will become the leader everyone depends on 5 years from now." He looked directly at Eva. "You can." The room fell silent again. Trent opened another folder and slid a document across the table. We're prepared to bring you back as Senior Director of Talent Strategy. Your salary will be higher than before, and you'll have complete authority to rebuild our recruitment process. Eva didn't reach for the document. Instead, she looked at Trent. Why me? Trent gave a small smile. Because we've spent 9 months trying to replace you. He paused. We finally accepted that we can't. Eva lowered her eyes toward the proposal but still didn't touch it. 25 years at Stone Gems had taught her to make important decisions slowly, never emotionally. This one deserved the same respect. Eva looked at the proposal for several quiet seconds before resting one hand on the folder. She still didn't open it. Instead, she looked back at Trent. May I ask you something? Anything. If the company performs well again. She met his eyes. What happens the next time there's pressure to reduce costs? The question lingered between them. Trent didn't answer immediately. Eva continued. Will experience become too expensive again? Trent lowered his eyes for a moment before speaking. If I've learned one thing over the past year, it's that experience isn't an expense, he smiled faintly. Replacing it is. Eva appreciated the answer. She could hear that he meant every word. She gently closed the proposal and slid it back across the table. Trent looked at her for a moment. You're saying no, Eva smiled warmly. I'm saying no to coming back as an employee. Trent let out a slow breath. I was afraid you'd say that. Eva glanced out the cafe window before looking back at him. For 25 years, I built my life around work. I don't regret a single year, she smiled. But over the past few months, I've had breakfast with my husband almost every morning. I've had afternoons with my children that I would have missed before. I've learned that there are parts of my life I can't postpone forever. Trent nodded quietly. He understood. Eva looked back at the proposal. I still love this profession, she paused. I just don't want it to own my life anymore. Trent sat silently for a few seconds before giving a small smile. Then maybe I've been asking the wrong question. Eva looked at him with curiosity. Trent leaned forward once more. What if he didn't have to choose? Eva pulled the proposal a little closer and closed it without reading another page. If Stone Gems truly wants to rebuild its recruitment process, I'll help. Trent looked up. Under one condition. Name it. I won't come back as a full-time employee. Trent listened carefully. I'll work as an independent consultant. Eva continued. I'll redesign your hiring system, train your recruiters, help interview key leadership positions, and build a process your team can continue using after I'm gone. Trent nodded slowly. And after that? Eva smiled. After that, your team takes over. Trent leaned back in his chair. It wasn't the answer he had hoped for. He wanted Eva back inside the company every day. But as he thought about it, he realized she was offering something even more valuable. She wasn't asking Stone Gems to depend on her forever. She was offering to teach the company how to stop making the same mistake again. Trent extended his hand across the table. Then let's build it together. Eva smiled and shook his hand. As partners. Before leaving the Human Resources Department, Trent turned toward the recruiters gathered around Eva. Before everyone gets back to work, I'd like to share one more piece of news. The room quickly became quiet again. Eva won't be returning as a full-time employee. A few disappointed faces appeared before Trent continued. She'll be working with Stone Gems as an independent consultant, helping us redesign the way we recruit and develop talent. The atmosphere changed almost immediately. Luke smiled. So we're not really saying goodbye this time, Eva laughed. Not this time. One of the newer recruiters raised her hand. Does that mean you'll be training us? That's exactly why I'm here, Eva replied. She walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room and wrote 2 words, skills. A few inches below, she wrote another, character. She stepped aside so everyone could see them. For the past year, we've become very good at measuring the first one. She underlined the second word. Now we're going to get better at recognizing this one. Everyone listened without interrupting. Eva continued. AI is remarkably good at preparing us for an interview. It is not capable of conducting one for us. That's where our work begins. Several recruiters nodded. Our responsibility isn't to find the most impressive resume, she smiled. It's to understand the person who's going to sit across from us, standing near the back of the room. Trent watched the team listening with complete attention. For months, Stone Gems had invested in better technology. Looking around the room, he realized the company's most valuable investment had never been software. It had always been the people who knew how to use it wisely. Over the following weeks, the Human Resources Department began working differently. AI continued reviewing applications, ranking qualifications, and organizing candidate information before interviews were scheduled. But no hiring decision was finalized until someone had spent enough time understanding the person behind the resume. Eva rarely gave people the answers directly. Instead, she listened as recruiters discussed candidates, then responded with another question. What made you trust this person? What did you learn during the interview that wasn't written in the resume? Would you still make the same decision if the AI report didn't exist? At first, the recruiters struggled to answer. Gradually, their conversations became deeper. They stopped relying on scores alone and started paying closer attention to judgment, honesty, accountability, and the way candidates responded when discussing failure. Luke noticed the difference before anyone else. New managers were settling into their teams more smoothly. Departments were requesting fewer replacement hires. Hiring managers who had once insisted on following AI rankings without question were now asking for longer interviews before making final decisions. One afternoon, Luke watched a young recruiter close an interview folder and smile. The AI ranked candidate a first, she said, but I think candidate B is the better leader. Instead of asking why she disagreed with the report, Luke smiled and asked the same question Eva always asked him. What did you hear? The recruiter explained her reasoning with confidence. Luke nodded. She hadn't memorized Eva's advice. She had learned how to think the way Eva had been teaching them to think. Standing outside the interview room, Eva quietly smiled before walking away. The lesson she hoped to leave behind had never been about resisting technology. It was about making sure people never stopped thinking for themselves. 3 months later, Stone Gems looked very different from the company Eva had left. Recruitment no longer revolved around finding the fastest match between a resume and a job description. AI continued handling the first stage of recruitment, while every important hiring decision once again depended on thoughtful conversations between people. But every leadership hire, every management position, and every role with long-term influence now passed through conversations designed by Eva. She visited the office only when needed, usually 2 or 3 days each month. The rest of the time, she reviewed hiring plans from home, met executives over video calls, and coached recruiters whenever they faced difficult decisions. For the first time in her career, Eva was doing the work she loved without sacrificing the life she loved. One morning, after finishing an online meeting with Luke, she closed her laptop, looked at the clock, and smiled. It wasn't even noon. 25 years earlier, she would have still been halfway through a full day of interviews. Now she slipped on her shoes, called for Milo, and stepped outside just as Peter was watering flowers in the front yard. "Finished already?" Peter asked with a grin. Eva smiled. "For today," Peter laughed. "I think you're finally getting the schedule I always wanted for you." Eva slipped her hand into his as Milo trotted happily ahead of them toward the neighborhood park. Word spread quickly through Minneapolis that Stone Gems had transformed the way it hired people. Executives from other companies began contacting Eva after hearing about the changes. Some wanted her to redesign their recruitment process. Others invited her to train human resources teams or help interview candidates for leadership positions. The offers arrived faster than Eva had expected. One evening, Peter glanced at the calendar hanging beside her desk and laughed. "You know you're getting busy again." Eva looked at the appointments and smiled. "I noticed." Peter raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" Eva laughed and shook her head. "Not this time." She picked up a pen and crossed one meeting off the schedule. Then she moved another to the following month. Peter watched with curiosity. "You just turned down a client." "I did." "A few years ago, you would have accepted every one of them." Eva nodded. "A few years ago, I thought every opportunity had to become an obligation." She closed the calendar. "Now I only accept the work that fits the life I want to keep." Peter smiled. "That sounds like someone who finally learned from her own career." Eva laughed. "It only took me 25 years." Outside the window, the evening sun settled over the neighborhood as the two of them enjoyed the quiet together. Eva still loved helping companies discover great people. The difference was that, for the first time in her professional life, her career worked around her life instead of the other way around. One afternoon, Luke called Eva after finishing another successful round of leadership interviews. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. After all these years, how do you still trust your instincts?" Eva smiled. "I don't." Luke looked confused. "You don't?" "No." She leaned back in her chair. "That's why I keep asking questions." Luke laughed. "I thought you'd say something much more complicated." Eva smiled. People change, industries change, technology changes. If I ever believe I already know everything about someone after reading a resume, that's the day I'll start making bad hiring decisions. Luke sat quietly for a moment before saying, "I think that's what everyone missed." Eva nodded. Curiosity is more valuable than certainty. After ending the call, Luke wrote the sentence on a sticky note and placed it beside his computer monitor, where he would see it before every interview he conducted. The following Sunday, the entire family gathered at Lyon's house for a backyard barbecue. Peter stood beside the grill while Lyon tried to convince him that his new recipe was better than the one he had been using for years. Taylor laughed as the two of them argued over something as unimportant as barbecue sauce. Milo wandered happily from one family member to another, collecting scraps whenever someone wasn't paying attention. Eva sat nearby, watching the conversation unfold with a smile that seemed to come more easily these days. At one point, Taylor walked over and handed her mother a glass of lemonade before sitting beside her. "Can I tell you something?" Eva nodded. "Of course." Taylor looked toward the backyard where Peter and Lyon were still laughing together. "I like this version of you," Eva smiled. "This version?" Taylor nodded. "You still love your work," she paused. "But now, when we invite you over, you actually come." Eva laughed softly. "I guess I do." Taylor rested her head lightly against her mother's shoulder. "When I was younger, I used to think your company needed you more than we did," she smiled. "Now I think everyone finally gets to share you." Eva slipped an arm around her daughter. She didn't defend the past. She didn't regret building the career she loved. But she was grateful life had given her a second chance to enjoy the moments she had postponed for so many years. A few weeks later, Eva sat across from a candidate applying for a director position at another company. The resume was impressive. The experience matched every requirement. The AI screening report had given the applicant one of the highest scores the company had ever recorded. Near the end of the interview, Eva closed the resume and smiled. "I'd like to ask one last question." The candidate nodded. "Imagine one of your team members makes a mistake that costs your department $1 million. Nobody knows it was their fault except you. What would you do?" The candidate remained silent for several seconds before answering. It wasn't the answer itself that caught Eva's attention. It was the pause before it. She noticed the hesitation, the willingness to think before speaking, and the decision to answer honestly instead of choosing the safest response. As the interview ended, the company's CEO looked at Eva. "Well?" Eva smiled. "He's qualified," the CEO laughed. "I already know that." Eva closed the file. More importantly, she looked back toward the door the candidate had just walked through. "I think people will want to follow him," the CEO smiled. "That's exactly what I needed to know." Several months later, Stone Gems held its annual leadership conference. Managers and executives from across the company filled the auditorium as Trent stepped onto the stage to reflect on the changes of the past year. Near the end of his presentation, the screen behind him displayed a single sentence. A resume tells you what someone has done. A conversation tells you who they can become. Trent looked across the audience before speaking. This company invested heavily in technology, and that was the right decision. He paused. But we also learned that technology works best when it's guided by people with experience, judgment, and the courage to ask better questions. He turned toward the front row where Eva and Peter were sitting together. "Some lessons are expensive." A warm smile crossed his face. "We're fortunate we had the chance to learn this one twice." The audience rose in applause as Eva smiled quietly. She never stood to acknowledge it. She simply reached for Peter's hand. After the conference ended, they walked out of the building together. Employees stopped to thank Eva as they passed, but no one asked when she would return full-time. They already knew the answer. Outside, Peter looked back at the Stone Gems headquarters one last time before turning to Eva. "Do you ever miss it?" Eva looked at the building where she had spent 25 years building careers for other people. She smiled. "I never stopped loving the work." She slipped her hand into Peter's. "I just finally learned not to love it more than the life waiting for me at home." Together they walked toward the parking lot, leaving the building behind without a trace of regret. Stone Gems had found a better way to hire. Eva had found a better way to live. Neither had returned to the past. Both had become better because they were willing to change.